How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another exciting video. In the last video, we went ahead and got started on implementing our mobile application. So far, it's looking pretty nice. We have our top app bar with the text newsfeed. We have our body, which currently just has the text posts, but essentially we want to have our list of posts, which are going to be nicely organized in nice looking cards. And then we have our bottom app bar and our floating action button. And then we also have to make sure that when we click this floating action button, we're actually making an HTTP request, which is going to make a request to our backend server where we're going to retrieve our posts, and then we're going to display them here. So that's kind of our goal. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So right now I have my Android emulator running. So I went into my terminal. I ran the command flutter run inside of my Flutter project while having my emulator open. And then you can also use the iOS emulator if you're on Mac OS. I'm just using the Android emulator, really doesn't matter. And then I have VS Code open. So I have this newsfeed folder open, which has my Flutter project called newsfeed, and it has my simple server. And then first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run my backend server because I'm going to have to make an HTTP request to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that first. So currently I'm navigated inside of my root directory, so inside of this newsfeed folder where I have my Flutter project and my simple server. So I'm going to navigate into my simple server with cd simple-server. And then inside of here I have all my different files, which are just the files in here. And then I'm going to activate my virtual environment. So I'm going to do source vem bin activate. And then I'm going to see this right here, which means I'm in my virtual environment. And then I'm going to run my server. So python manage.py run server. And then this is going to run my backend server. All right, so with that, I can close that terminal. So I do that with control and then that backtick thingy. So that's going to close that. And then where I'm going to work is inside of this lib source app.dart. So this is where I'm going to start implementing some functionality. So what we want to do is when we press our floating action button, we want to make our HTTP request. So what I'm going to do is above this build function, I'm going to have a function called getPosts. And then this is essentially going to get my posts. So instead of this anonymous function, I'm going to pass a reference to my getPosts function. And I'm not going to put these curly, or not the curly brace, but the round parentheses because this would invoke it. I just want to have a reference to it so that when I press the button, it's going to run the code inside of my function. Now this function right here is just going to make an HTTP request where we're going to retrieve basically some JSON data. We're going to parse that JSON data into some kind of format that Dart can understand. And then we're going to have some kind of state inside of here, which is just going to be like a list of posts, which we're going to utilize that data and update that piece of state. So that's what we're going to try to do. So in essence, this right here isn't going to return anything. It's just updating our state. So I'm going to pass a return type of void. All right, so with that, we want to make an HTTP request. So we have to bring in the HTTP package. So to kind of see the documentation, you can go inside of Google, just type Dart HTTP. And then we have a link here for this pub.dev packages HTTP. So we can kind of take a look at this. So to import it, you just import package http/http.dart. So I'm going to go ahead and do that in my file. So import, it's a third-party package. So I'm going to use the package : way of importing, then http/http.dart. So this is going to bring in the whole entire HTTP package. And then in order to actually utilize this, because right now it says it doesn't exist, so I have to open up my side window, then open this pubspec.yaml file. And then inside of the dependencies, I want to make sure I bring in this dependency. Currently we have the Flutter dependency, we have this Cupertino icons dependency, but I want another one, which is going to be my HTTP dependency. And then you can pass in the version, or you can just pass in any, which is what I'm going to do, and then it's going to determine what that version is going to be. So if you're using VS Code and you just save this, it's going to go ahead and install this for you. Now, if you're not using VS Code, basically you're going to want to go into your terminal, and then you're going to want to be inside of your Flutter application, and then the command you're going to run. So I'm just going to show it here. It's just going to be flutter packages get, and then you're going to click enter, and that's going to install your packages. But if you are using VS Code, you don't have to worry about that. It's just going to do it automatically for you. All right, so now we have access to that. So let's take a look at this. we have this documentation API reference, so I can click on that. And then I can click on the HTTP library. And then here we see some different functions. So in our particular application, we're just going to be making a GET request to an endpoint, which is going to basically give us our JSON data, which is going to be the posts. So the only thing I'm really doing is utilizing this GET. Now we do have access to other things as well, but in essence, because the only thing I'm going to be using is this GET inside of here, instead of bringing in the entire HTTP library, I'm just going to do this show GET. So that way I only show the GET function inside of this file. So it's going to be much less code in essence, which is going to make things a little more efficient. So let's take a look at this GET function. So basically what we do is we pass a URL to this GET function, and then we also can pass headers. So this is a named parameter where we have this map data type, which is going to map keys of string to values of type string. So that's basically the two things that we can pass to this. And then this named parameter is optional, although I think it's good to pass the header types. And then we also see the return type is a future. So if you've used JavaScript, basically you have promises whenever you have asynchronous requests. A future is basically the Dart equivalent of a promise. So that's what we're going to be utilizing. So let's go inside of our getPosts function. And then let's make this HTTP request. So I'm going to have a variable, which I'm going to call response, which I'm going to set equal to that get function. And then the first parameter that we pass to this is our endpoint. So we're going to do HTTP://. And then if you're using the Android emulator, it's going to differ from if you're using the iOS emulator with what you pass here. So if you're using the iOS emulator, what you're going to pass here is localhost:8000 and then the endpoint. So /API/posts/get-posts. So this is basically the endpoint that I set inside of the backend server, which is going to be the endpoint that we hit, which then is going to basically return us our JSON data, which is our posts. And then as for this endpoint, basically depends on the API server, what this endpoint is going to be. If you're using a different kind of API server, of course, it's going to be different. But in my case, this is what I set it to be. And then if you're using iOS, once again, this is what you're going to use. You're going to do localhost:8000. Now, if you're using the Android emulator, instead of localhost:8000, you're going to do 10.0.2.2:8000. So this is how you're going to do things when you're running a backend server locally on your machine. Now, if this was some kind of backend API on the web, then you don't have to worry about this whole idea of the request being different on Android and iOS. You would just, in essence, have like your domain .com or .net, whatever it is, and then your endpoint. And then you don't have to worry about this whole idea of it being different. But if you're doing things locally, if you're using Android emulator, do 10.0.2.2:8000. iOS, you're going to do localhost:8000. So yeah. So make sure you do that. So anyway, this response, right now we're getting an error because we have to basically have a type to this. And then the type I'm going to put, it's not going to be var, because this in essence means that this is going to vary inside of this function, but we're not going to do anything to it. So I'm going to use the final keyword. All right, so now the next step is we basically have some kind of JSON data that we're retrieving, and then we can access that JSON data with response.body. So this is where it's going to be. And then I can print out that response.body. But this response.body is going to be in JSON format. I need to basically decode this JSON and turn it into something that Dart can understand. So I'm going to bring in a Dart package. So I'm going to import Dart::convert. This is going to be the package, which is going to have a function, which is going to allow me to decode this JSON data. So I'm basically going to wrap this response.body in JSON.decode. And then this right here is going to decode this. Now I'm still getting an error because this get function returns a promise. So this is an asynchronous request. So I basically need to ensure that I wait for this to happen, have this response then get updated, and then do this. So the way I can do that is either by chaining like a .then with an anonymous function, So that's one way that you can kind of handle this, but the way that I prefer to handle it is basically using the async await syntax. This is kind of similar to the way it's done in JavaScript. So basically after these round parentheses, you want to define this function as being asynchronous. So you're going to pass the async keyword. So this is going to basically tell this function that there's some kind of asynchronous request happening inside of it. And then anywhere where you have this asynchronous stuff happening, you want to put the await keyword. So this right here is going to recognize this is returning a promise, or in Dart, this is referred to as a future. So it's going to wait for this request to happen. It's going to get the data, and then it's going to pass it to this. Now I also want to wrap this stuff inside of a try catch, just in case if anything goes wrong. So I'm going to go ahead, cut this, put it inside of my try. And then I'm going to have a catch where I catch the error. And then if an error happens, I'm just going to print out something like error occurred. So I'm not going to do any kind of special error handling, just going to have it like this. So this is what we have so far. So if I go ahead and basically reload this, so I'm going to do Shift R. Now when I click this button, I should see printed out my JSON data. So we restarted the application. So if I go here, click this button, there we are. So this right here is my JSON data. So this entire thing right here. So this is a map data structure in Dart. So that in essence is what this JSON.decode did for me. It grabbed this JSON data and turned it into a map. And then the map data structure is something I can actually work with in my Dart file, whereas the JSON data is something I can't really work with. So right now I have a key of type posts, which is a list with all of my posts. And then each post itself is also a map object, where I have the key ID, which maps to the value of the ID. Then I have the key title, which has its value. I have the key image, which is its value, and also the key content. So each of these have this data right here. All right, so far so good. And now one thing I want to kind of note with this final keyword. So this is basically how it works. So final just means that this is not going to change within this function. So let's say right now we get our posts. Let's say if some more posts were added and then we click that button again, then it would go ahead and run this function and it would kind of update it still. So this doesn't mean it's like for the remainder of the app running, we cannot change this. It's just within this function. So if I were to do something like, let's say, response is equal to JSON.decode response.body, basically I cannot update this value because it's final. If this was a var, then I could do something like this. But in essence, I don't care to change this value in the remainder of this function. That's why I define this as final. So this is just kind of a note on this final keyword just to avoid any confusion. Because in essence, what I want to do is I want to loop through this data and then I want to update some kind of state. So my state is going to be a list, which I call posts. And then we're going to initialize it like so. So this is what we're going to have for now. And then I'm going to go ahead and loop through. So I'm going to have the for keyword. And then I'm going to loop through this response.body, which I decode to look like so. Now, this JSON data, I can't loop through this itself. What I'm going to end up looping through is this posts, because this is my list essentially. So I can't do this. I have to basically utilize the key of posts. And now that is something that I can iterate over. So now I'm going to have var post in JSON.decode response.body posts. And then this post is going to represent each of those map objects. So in the first iteration, it's going to be this right here. Second iteration, it's going to be where is it? This right here, and then so forth. So in my case, I have 4 map objects that we're going through. So each iteration, the post is going to be represented by that. All right, and then basically for each iteration, what I want to do is I basically want to update my post. So I'm going to do posts.add, and then I'm going to add that post essentially. Now currently this post is a map data type, and what I want to do instead is have some kind of model or some kind of object that represents my post itself, instead of just having this like map object. So what I'm going to do is inside of this source folder, I'm going to make a models folder, and then I'm going to make a new file, postModel.dart. And then here I'm going to have a class that essentially represents my post model. So I'm going to have class postModel. And then this right here is going to represent my data. So what I have is a title, user, image, content. That's like the data that I really care about. So I'm going to have a title spelled like this. I'm going to have some kind of image URL. I'm going to have a user, and I'm going to have my content. This right here is essentially what I'm going to have. So I don't want to have like a map data type where I have like post title, which is the way I access it. Instead, I want to have some kind of object where I can do like post.title and then like post.image URL. That's how I want to have this represented. So each of these attributes are going to be of type string. So I'm just going to put multiple cursors, put a type of string for each of these, and then put a colon. So these are the attributes within this post model. And then I want to make the constructor. So I'm going to have post model. Then as for the parameter is just going to be this sort of JSON data. Or I guess more, it's not going to be JSON data, but instead it's going to be like the map object. So let's say this right here. This is what I'm going to pass to it the first time. And then second iteration is going to be the next one. So it's this map object. So that's what I'm passing to this. So parsed JSON is what I'm going to call this. And then essentially we're going to update these values. So I'm going to update title to be my parsed JSON title. So I'm going to access that title key. I'm going to copy this down a few lines. I'm going to have my image URL. And then that's going to be, so first I'm going to access this key title. Then I'm going to access this key image, which is going to have that value. So this right here is going to be image. And then I'm going to update user and content. So user, it's going to be, where is it? There it is, my user key. And then I'm going to use my content key. So user and content. And then also a good thing to always do is kind of put the type of the parameter. So in this case, it's going to be a map. So that's the type. And I'm going to map a string to a string, essentially, is what I'm doing. Because all of these things are strings. But, so yeah, like the title's a string, the user's a string, this image is a string, and so is this content. But it's a little more proper to use something like dynamic. Because in essence, like you're going to be mapping a key to some sort of value. So I think it's a little better to use dynamic instead of string. So this is going to be the type of this parsed JSON. And then that's basically it. Right now we have this to represent our posts. So the next thing I have to do is I have to make sure that I import this inside of here. So I'm going to import. And then what I'm importing is my models folder and then post model.dart. So now I can have access to that. And then instead of passing this post like so, what I can do instead is do new post model and then pass in that post, which is going to be my map object. And yeah, that's basically how I do that. And then another thing I want to do is inside of here, you can also pass that name parameter of headers, which is something we saw here. So that's another thing I want to kind of show you how to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to have the named parameter of headers. And then I'm going to make a new variable. So I'm going to do that right over here. I'm going to call it request headers. Whoop, I have to set that equal to this. And then this right here, if we take a look, is going to be of type map, which is going to map a string to a string. So that's what I'm going to define this variable as. So a map, which maps a string to another string. And then inside of here, I'm going to have my request headers. So the only one I'm going to really utilize is the accept header. And then that's just going to signify that I'm expecting to receive some kind of JSON data. So I'm going to have a string accept. So that's the key. And then the value is going to be application/JSON. And then this right here is essentially how I can have these different header types. Now, if let's say I was making some kind of post request, then I could also have, let's say I'm passing some kind of JSON data, then I can have like content-type, application, JSON, and then you can have things like your authorization headers if you have to be authorized, and then that can be some kind of like bear token, let's say, with your bear token. So yeah, the only one I'm worried about is this accept application JSON, and then I can just pass this request headers to this named parameter of headers, and then that's going to go ahead and do that. And I'm also going to put a comma after this just to have it formatted the way that I like. And yeah, there we go. So this is how you can also pass headers. And then now this is going to go ahead and update my posts. Although whenever I click that button, it's going to just keep adding these posts. So what I want to do is I want to clear my state first, and then I want to add the new posts. So before I do this loop, I'm going to do posts.clear. That's going to clear whatever values are in here. And then another thing I want to do is this list right now, it's going to hold types, not of map, but it's going to hold types of my post model. So I'm going to also pass the generic type of post model just to kind of signify that that's the kind of data that's inside of this posts. And then another way that I can kind of declare this value is I can either do the, I guess, the brackets like I did there, or I can do new list, which is going to have the generic type of post model. That's another way that you can kind of initialize this. And I think that's the way I'm going to do it, but it doesn't really matter. And then I also have to make sure I invoke this. So I'm going to use the parentheses here. All right, so there's quite a bit of code here, but right now we saw how we can actually make an HTTP request. And then another thing that I need to do is also use the set state function. And then I basically put that wherever I update the state. Now, it doesn't really matter where you put this. I can literally put set state right here and just put it like that. But in essence, what you want to do is basically just put it wherever the state is being updated. So basically where my state's being updated is in this for loop. So I'm going to do set state, and then I'm going to wrap this for loop inside of there. So just like that. And then that's basically going to signify that my state has been updated. All right, so currently we have this right here. Although the set state, I didn't actually do this correctly. What you actually want to have is you want to have an anonymous function inside of here, and then inside of that you want to go ahead and pass where your state's being updated. So it's going to look more like this. And then this is going to basically signify that my state has been updated. And then after this, I can also kind of just rest assured that my posts has been updated. So I can do something like print posts. And then I can go ahead and kind of take a look at that. So let's refresh this. All right. So if I refresh, there we are. So right now what we see is just this instance of post model, instance of post model. Because whenever you do this print, it's going to look for a toString function. Currently, our post model doesn't have a toString function. So that's also something I can basically add to this if I want. So I can do string, toString, and then I can have some kind of toString function. So I can return, let's say, my title plus a space plus, that doesn't really matter. Maybe for now I can just return title. Why not? That's going to be my representation of this. So if I go ahead and do a hot restart and then do that again, instead of the instance of post model, I can kind of see the titles, and then that's going to rest assured that this is working properly. And there we are. We have fun camping trip, super fun time last night, awesome time at the cottage, and then also this hiking trip with my best friends. And then if I click this again, what I expect to happen is for my post state to get cleared right here, and then to basically re-add whatever values inside of this response, and then I expect that to get printed out. So if I click this again, I should see the exact same thing printed out, whereas if I didn't have this clear, it would basically just keep adding to this posts. All right, so right now I have the behavior that I expect whenever I click that button, so that's perfect. So this video is getting a little long, so I'm going to put a pause right here. So, I mean, right now we got some pretty good functionality happening. So we saw how to make an HTTP request. We saw how to kind of update the state, and how to also create this post model, which is going to represent the data inside of the state. So we saw how to do quite a few things. We also saw this set state function, which we kind of wrap wherever we're updating our state. And then basically what we're going to go ahead and implement in the next video is, where is it? Right here. So right now we have this text posts. Instead, what we want to have is our posts. So what we're going to see in the next video is we're just going to have a class which is going to return a widget, which is going to be my list of posts. And then we're going to utilize that post model. So in essence, I'm going to have some kind of post class, which we're going to have a constructor that expects basically my list of posts. And then we're going to return a widget which represents that data. So that's what we're going to see in the next video. So that's going to wrap everything up here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave this video a like, subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy this kind of content, hit that notification bell to get notifications for when a new video comes out. Also, click those links in the description so you can like the Facebook page or join the Facebook group. That way, if you have some kind of questions, you can basically message me personally and then I can get back to you. And then, of course, make sure to have those questions be somewhat reasonable and not take me hours to basically answer. So anything related to generally web development, app development, or something based on a tutorial I've created, and then I'll basically go ahead and help you out with whatever kind of problem you have. So anyway, that'll be everything, and I'll see you guys in the next video.